Hello, my name is Jonathan Lowell. I am the Engagements and Programs Coordinator for Planet Texas 2050, a research initiative at the University of Texas with the goal of being of service towards making the state of Texas more resilient and equitable. We do this by undertaking interdisciplinary research that aims to make societal impact. And as part of that project, we started this series, which we've called Resilience Roundtables, which bring together leaders across the academic, nonprofit, government, advocacy, and artistic sectors. For this academic year, we are exploring the theme of academic community partnerships for adaptation and resilience. And we will hear case studies both nationally and internationally, detailing the ways in which academics work with various community partners to build and maintain fruitful relationships and provide actionable research towards making communities more resilient. For this, our second in this year's series, we will hear about the Intersecting Energy Cultures Working Group, which is a project under the Penn Program in Environmental Humanities at the University of Pennsylvania. The IEC Working Group brings together researchers working with community-based partners to develop deeper understanding of the varied and uneven impacts stemming from the international workings of energy industries. This is done through the experimental rubric of Environmental Humanities and explores the ways that arts-driven and humanistic methods of inquiry enable us to carry out meaningful community-based participatory research around historic, contemporary, and future sites of energy production. And before we begin, I'd like to read the land acknowledgement that was developed by the program in Native American and Indigenous Studies here at UT. We would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the indigenous lands of Turtle Island, the ancestral name for what is now called North America. Moreover, we would like to acknowledge the Alabama Cusara, Caddo, Carrizo Comecrudo, Coyobotecan, Comanche, Kickapoo, Lipan Apache, Tonkawa, and Isleta del Sur Pueblo, and all the American Indian and Indigenous peoples and communities who have been or have become a part of these lands and territories in Texas. And in recognition of the ongoing and cumulative challenges faced by Indigenous peoples in Central Texas and globally, we call upon the University of Texas at Austin to repatriate the ancestral remains held by the Texas Archaeological Research Laboratory to their Indigenous descendant communities and native lands, to support the transition of the program in Native American and Indigenous Studies into a center, and to establish a protocol of research and study on tribal or native lands, and to foster an ethics and practice of engaged scholarship with and for Indigenous peoples and communities, locally and internationally. So with that, I would like to introduce our speaker. Dr. Bethany Wiggin is currently the Curry C. and Thomas A. Barron Visiting Professor in the Environment and Humanities at Princeton University. From 2014 to 2024, she served as the founding director of the Penn Program in Environmental Humanities. Her scholarship explores histories of migration, language, and cultural translation since the Columbian Exchange across the North Atlantic world. She is currently completing the monograph Utopia Found and Lost in Penn's Woods, while also laying groundwork for a new transatlantic project on energy infrastructure and anti-fossil fuel networks. Simultaneously, she is at work on special issues on environmental futures and on arts-driven methods for energy justice. She holds research to be a human right and leads public research projects designed to connect academic and community expertise for environmental and climate repair. These projects have been supported by the National Geographic, Whiting, and Andrew W. Mellon Foundations, and she has offered testimony about project findings to audiences ranging from school children to the City Council of Philadelphia, the US Congress, and UNESCO. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Bethany Wiggin.
Wow, thank you so much, Jonathan. I'm so glad to be here Today, I'm speaking to you from the ancestral homelands of the Lenape people in what is known by its colonial Latin Greek name, Philadelphia. I'm really delighted to join you and thank you so much to your vision, Planet Texas's vision for resilience research. And thank you to all of you online and listening and for the tech help. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We have done lots of behind the scenes prep work to make sure all of the tech works. And I'll just say thank you for bearing with us in the case that the best laid plans go awry, but I think we'll be just fine. So as you heard Jonathan say, a decade ago, I co-founded a transdisciplinary environmental humanities program here in Philadelphia at the University of Pennsylvania. And from the inception of the program, we really put 4 commitments at our core. And you can see them here. The collaborative, we always center the collaborative interdisciplinary research on the environment across the arts and sciences. We really push and believe in arts-driven inquiry into place, both locally and globally. We center public engagement and work with and alongside environmental justice communities, and that's particularly in Philadelphia with, in other words, urban ecological concerns. And we are committed to the co-creation and stewardship of public living archives for environmental and climate justice. So in this age of unprecedented, anthropogenically driven environmental and climate change, our aim has been to create projects that can cultivate relationships to encourage mutual flourishing of humans and more than human worlds, broadly speaking. And in the first years of this program, I focused on fostering mutuality between my own elite academic community in Philadelphia and the environmental justice communities and sacrifice zones at our campus's borders. In a nutshell, we've been working on projects that explore how to make research beyond extractivism. In the last 2 years, building on close to a decade of experience making place-based work with students and community partners in Philadelphia, I've been exploring how the arts-driven participatory action research methods we've devised locally might be scaled and adapted for other places and partnerships. In this talk, I'm going to focus on one of the recent projects we've been working on called Intersecting Energy Cultures. But I'd also be happy to talk at some point about a collaborative climate storytelling project I lead, My Climate Story. This talk is also meant as an invitation to consider some larger questions that animate transdisciplinary research. How can campus community partnerships support impacted communities? What research methods and outcomes are desirable for community members and for academics? How can campus community research partnerships break down extractive research paradigms? How can we measure the quality and success of this kind of research? I've edited my talk down a little bit in order to make sure we have time to talk together about these questions in the Q&A. So the talk is in 3 broad parts. The first 2 are very short, and in the second and third, I'm also going to show film clips from documentary shorts that I've made, and also as a way to introduce collaborators' voices into my talk. So in the first part, I'll survey some of the critical and conceptual scaffolding that I found helpful in building campus community work, and I'll then turn to a project called Futures Beyond Refining, a Philadelphia-based research collaborative that was born in the immediate aftermath of a near catastrophic refinery explosion of what was then the East Coast's largest and oldest oil refinery. That project, Futures Beyond Refining, was the immediate inspiration for creating the working group and collaborative outcomes of the Intersecting Energy Cultures project. And I'll show in the final part 3 shorts that we've made as part of the research outcomes of that working group. So, community-informed and community-led research pose fundamental questions about what we mean when we say research. These and other democratic, community-led and community-informed research is, of course, democratic. And democratic research methods force us to reconsider what excellent research is and does. Unlike service learning models, campus community research partnerships do not assume that expertise lies only on one side of town-gown borders. My own work with community research partners draws on methods from participatory action research, or PAR. PAR emerges mostly from the field of public health, and it really disrupts academic business as usual. As researcher Flora Cornish describes it, PAR projects often mismatch with institutional research infrastructure. Like emancipatory research more broadly, PAR takes interest in tackling injustices and building futures supportive of human thriving, rather than objectivity and neutrality. As public health experts and climate scientists, too, grapple with science's apparent inability to convince broad swaths of the public of research results accepted in the scientific community as true, the needs for inter and transdisciplinary collaboratives seem obvious, perhaps, but the answers to questions about what these research and learning communities should look like and how their work will be evaluated are far from settled. My work involving PAR methods has been particularly informed by sustainability educators and their frustrations and disappointments about sustainability education's failure to deliver on its decades-old promise, transformational promise. Since at least 2016, when storyteller Amitav Ghosh described climate change as a failure of the imagination, environmental and climate scholars, educators, and artists have grappled with the implications. Michelle Lee Moore and Manjana Milkorite, for example, diagnose a persistent failure to enact just and sustainable futures to be due, at least in part, to what they call a triple failure of the imagination. Petra White and her co-authors urge the development of agentic competencies that center creative and systems thinking. In dialogue with these and others' perspectives on creative and imaginative failures and solutions, my work broadly considers how we can together train our collective imagination at this time of accelerating anthropogenically driven ecological and climate emergencies. In making this work, I've learned tremendously from non-academic researchers, from community members, and from their shared lived experiences. And I increasingly share their impatience to create research communities and outcomes that can address urgent climate and environmental concerns in both the short and long terms. So now I'm moving on to the second part of my talk about futures beyond refining. And you see one of my community partners here on the lower left-hand side, Mrs. Tammy Reeves, who lives in the neighborhood of Grays Ferry, which is immediately next door to the University of Pennsylvania. So today, our local actions have global ramifications, and our collective, uneven, and often unfair transformations of global planetary systems also have local impacts. We can say that at this moment, across the planet, we are all now neighbors. Our neighborliness happens to also be a finding upheld by some European courts in a ruling, for example, that a German energy company must pay reparations to a Peruvian farmer who suffered climate injustice. So in my thinking about neighbors and planetary neighborliness, I also want to know what it means to be an academic neighbor, also in my city, what it means to be a good neighbor. The University of Pennsylvania is next door and amidst dense fossil fuel infrastructure. And in Grays Ferry, where my research partners live, generations of residents have suffered health and continue to suffer health, educational, and economic impacts quite typical of people living in energy sacrifice zones across the globe. From Mrs. Reeves, as well as her husband Charles, and their organization, Resident Action Committee 2, I've learned how to co-create work informed by academic research, but not only relevant to academics. Together and with my students, university students, as well as 8th grade science students, we've collaboratively designed and carried out research for futures beyond refining. Our relationships have delivered outcomes amplifying our collective voices in local policy arenas. I understand our work as building on what STS researcher Sarah Wiley calls civic infrastructure, which is really entails the creation and distribution of, now in Wiley's words, research tools, methods, and programs designed for non-corporate ends to help redress the information and technical imbalances faced by communities dealing with large-scale multinational industries. So here you see some of the projects that we've made together, including this billboard that functioned as a temporary memorial to lives lost to refining. This was a memorial that was co-created and produced under the leadership of artist Amy Balkin, but with extensive workshops that were hosted and facilitated by Resident Action Committee 2. The billboard was mounted for the summer of 2021 in Philadelphia next to the former refinery site and under a highway that carries roughly 800,000 cars daily in and out of the city of Philadelphia, traversing the former refinery's border and passing right next to the University of Pennsylvania. And I'm also now going to introduce to you Mrs. Reeves' voice. She is the narrator that you'll hear in this clip from a short documentary we made about our project together.
Oh, whatever the best plan is killing their lives. Stress of today, they'll continue to lie and say it's not harmful. Oh, it is harmful, very harmful. If they're closed down, why are there still fumes coming out of it? You know, so what they said was, oh, they're cleaning the pipes over there. It's not hazardous. They told us it wasn't hazardous. If it's not hazardous, why did you even put on hazmat to go in and get it?
So fast forward 2 years to 2022 and the launch of a project very much inspired by Futures Beyond Refining. Intersecting Energy Cultures is a project that was built to test a variety of community-based participatory research methods, all intended to amplify community concerns in historically intensive energy landscapes. 2 years ago, Dr. Rebecca Macklin, my co-principal investigator, Dr. Macklin and I issued a call to join a working group. We explained our primary aim is to bring together researchers working directly with community-based partners to develop a picture of the varied and uneven impacts that stem from the international workings of energy industries. Our emphasis on intersecting energy cultures means that we seek to explore the impacts of industries including, but not limited to, petroleum, nuclear, gas, and coal, as well as renewable energy forms. By thinking about the ways that these energy forms intersect, this working group will specifically attend to how communities are all too frequently caught in the middle of multiple and historically overlapping forms of energy production, which amplify existing social and economic vulnerabilities. This expansive focus on the overlapping histories and futures of energy production draws to light how new energy regimes often quite literally build upon existing energy infrastructures. We developed the project through the experimental rubric of the Environmental Humanities we detailed because, again, this is from the call for applications that we set out. We use the experimental rubric of the Environmental Humanities because, quote, we seek to explore the ways that arts-driven and humanistic methods of inquiry might enable us to carry out meaningful community-based participatory research around historic, contemporary, and future relations with sites of energy production. We believe that the arts and humanities offer valuable methods of engagement for participatory work and possible avenues for the co-production of knowledge with communities. We therefore prioritize the participation of researchers keen to develop new ways of integrating humanistic and arts-based research paradigms into energy research. We were gratified that we had 78 applications. We were able to fund 10 teams with modest startup grants seeded by the University of Pennsylvania. Each of the 10 teams who have been part of the group includes both academic and community partners. And as part of the application process, we required materials from both parts of the team. Together, they have developed arts workshops. These workshops that the teams have developed employ a variety of methods. They involve ethnographic interviews, community archiving, and a range of storytelling practices and genres, including story maps, community tours, and theatrical performances. We have a special issue forthcoming of an academic journal, but we've also been working very hard and perhaps extra hard on extra academic research outcomes, particularly those that we hope will be especially valuable for our community-based researchers, including policy briefs and a series of short films. This past summer in July, I offered a multi-part policy brief writing sprint for all members of the working group. And I've been working this fall to edit and compile them for publication, together with a broader set of recommendations about how to create and support campus community collaborations for energy justice. We developed some curriculum that had to do with pre-writing exercises, and then a live workshop in which we drew on the pre-writing prompts that I had given participants, and then participants drafted briefs, policy briefs together, circulated them with their community partners, refined them, sent them to me for editing and then refinement. And we're working on a two-part distribution method in which each individual brief will be circulated by the research collective locally, whether that's in Aberdeen, Scotland, or in Coshocton, Ohio, but will also be part of a bundle of policy briefs, which help to illustrate the ways that the arts-driven research can help democratize energy policy making discourse. In addition to this more formal policy work, we also made a set of documentary short films about this arts-driven community-led work of each team. The films are intended to be viewed both as standalone short films as well as an ensemble. And like the Futures Beyond Refining documentary that inspired these short films, they are meant to be accessible to a wide range of audiences and also pragmatically to help teams as they seek further funding to support their work. I'm going to show you 3 examples from this film collection. Dr. Macklin and I wrote the scripts for these films. I directed the films and had a lot of support also producing them. We were able to, with a small grant from Penn Global, we were able to hire a professional production team to help us with the final cuts. So we're now going to show you 3 of these shorts, well, excerpts from them. And in the first, you'll hear Dr. Macklin and myself talk about how the work has gone. And I'm going to try to reshare my screen with you. And Renee is also standing by in the event.
Already, just let me know.
Okay, perfect. Let's see how it goes, and you tell me if it doesn't work correctly. Let's see here. Might need you to jump in. Let's try. I think, Renee, we might need to turn it over to you to play this
Okay.
short film.
You can, yeah, unshare your screen and I will share it here. Actually, I was looking at how to design my own participatory research projects around questions of energy justice. What so often seems to happen is that researchers will arrive at communities with a predefined set of ideas of what they want to achieve, and communities actually have very
we are really finding effective ways of introducing community voices into policy arenas. We all know that transition is necessary, but will it be a just transition?
I really need to understand what communities can get out and unlock a better model of carrying out participatory research might look like one that genuinely can lead to justice. This led us to start a working group to look for like-minded researchers from a huge range of disciplines and energy cultures, really trying to form our own community of learners and collaborators to develop a set of methodologies that might be useful to other people too that are looking to do this.
This is a sprawling group, and with such a sprawl comes a number of challenges. They are working in quite disparate places in different contexts and different energy regimes as well, and also with the different community campus partnerships.
Thing that becomes so apparent through all these individual projects is just how particular energy justice is in each of these spaces. It is not possible to have a just transition if it's top down and not responsive to those local particularities and specific community needs.
These arts-driven methods have helped communities to both articulate their story, which pieces of that history and story are important, and what are the pieces that they want policymakers and decision makers to recognize, and then from that to be able to articulate a pretty clear sense of what energy justice will look like in that community.
I'm so excited now for everyone to see the films which really celebrate the fact of one of these projects, which are so fantastic for all versions.
Great, thank you. So I'm gonna, it was a little bit laggy on my end, but because of the subtitles, I think that you can get a gist of what's happening in these films. I'm gonna show you, as I mentioned, 2 films from the 10 teams that we made films for. The first film is from the team based in Ohio, in Coshocton, Ohio. Their project was called Calling Hours. And in their project, they used the academic partners made up of a sociologist and a theater maker, used ethnographic interviews to then develop a theater project with their community partner, which was a local theater group led by Anne, who you will first hear talking in this film. They were, as Calling Hours, as the title suggests, it's a requiem of sorts, a requiem for a coal-fired energy power plant that was shuttered quite abruptly, as they say in the excerpt that you're about to hear, quite abruptly during COVID-19 in 2019. And this plant had been at the heart of the community really for decades, in some cases funding educational programs in schools and of course providing employment for generations of community members. They set themselves the task of memorializing this plant and the community and the losses that the community was experiencing. And I'll let them take it from here. Renee, if you could show us the first 2 minutes and 10 seconds of Calling Hours. Renee, I'm not hearing the sound at all. I don't know if others are able to.
I'm not either.
Let me try this again here real quick. Now, for some reason, it's not allowing me to select share sound, which is odd. Let me try this again.
Renee, maybe I could try and show it from
Okay.
this end. I
Please
do
do.
want them to be able to hear their voices.
Okay, there you go.
Thank you.
Systems and policies and programs. Early on, I think early December 2021, members of the research team, Tom, the school superintendent, and I gathered in the parking lot of the closed plant. And we were standing at the base of a pretty large mountain of coal ash. And I just clearly remember Tom saying, I don't know how we're ever going to represent the monumentality of this on stage. And meaning not just this ash mountain, but the monumentality of the plant, the work life, the hole that was left. One smokestack was 800 feet tall. And when it came down like that, like a falling tree.
Calling Hours combined spoken text, live music, and large-scale video projection in a theatrical memorial service of sorts that invited residents of Coshocton, Ohio to remember and in many cases grieve the loss of a large coal-fired power plant on which their community had heavily relied and which was abruptly shuttered during the COVID-19 pandemic.
I've been actively involved in the interviews, gathering the interview data, helping design the project. But then at a certain point, we just handed that interview data over to Anne and Tom, and I didn't really have much to do with the rest of creating the performance. And so didn't really know what to expect and was just sitting there in the audience, elbow to elbow with former power plant workers and community members there with their kids. And to hear our interview data being acted out on stage, to hear people laughing and crying and just sort of reacting to the performance was just a really magical experience.
The idea was to make the research accessible to the community through bringing this theater piece to the community, making it in the community. And that was to the end of inspiring local conversations around issues of energy systems and policies and programs aimed at bolstering community resilience.
Okay, I hope that went okay for you, sound and video wise. I am gonna go ahead and in just 1 second show you one final film clip. This film was made by the research partnership based on with community partners located in La Guajira in Colombia. In La Guajira, it's the site of a huge wind park or aeolic park that's being built out in Colombia with very little to no input of the indigenous communities whose ancestral homelands and present homelands these are. This film features a variety of participatory research methods, including kite flying workshops. Wind, after all, is very abundant here. And the research team was very eager to use kite flying workshops because they wanted to also hear the voices of children and really to facilitate an intergenerational discussion. And they also worked with a community research partner who himself was making a community film. So this is a film about kite making and filmmaking. So with no further ado, I will show you this short clip from No Aire, No Te Vendas.
Energy is a term that indigenous communities have used in order to address the relationships with the territory, with the ancestors, with the beings that inhabit the territories. Whereas electricity is a modern concept that simplifies the relationship with the world in a singular way, where energy is only seen as equal to generation, transmission, and consumption. The title of our project is a verse from Chilean poet Pablo Neruda's poem, Ode to Air, who already in the 1960s urged air to escape corporate efforts to commodify it, to own it, and to sell it for profit. We're witnessing a slow and also reloaded colonization process of the wind and the sun. According to the cosmology and ontology of the Wayuu people, this entity is losing its ancestral meaning to transform it into a commodified object. Only the word Hepirachi, the Wayuu name for the wind of the east, is now the name of the first wind energy park in Colombia. So this energy regime is fragmenting cultures, territories, and landscapes. The Department of La Guajira in Colombia has been a sacrificed territory for wind energy production and other types of renewable energy production. And around 40 wind parks have been designed in this Wayuu territory without consulting the indigenous communities. Many municipalities have been greatly affected by this infrastructural development, such as Manaure, which is the community where we have conducted our fieldwork. This is an important area which is advertised as the new energy paradise and constructed as empty for new development renewable projects. We aim to explore this renewable energy culture as a spaces to understand and act with these affected communities in order to research collectively what are desired and undesired presents and futures for local communities in this context of renewable energy infrastructures. And how are these embodied understandings of energy from the ancestral perspectives and cosmologies, which are the perspectives which were not included in policy decisions or in negotiations when deciding where to locate these aeolic parks. Our project responds to that situation with a decolonizing gesture towards winds and indigenous territories through our collaborative archive of alternative audiovisual storytelling about wind energy that hopefully challenges the extractivist energy culture that sees energy only as electricity and as a commodity. With the Wayuu community of Rancheria y Arosecat, we have registered the oral storytelling built around the territory, energy, and wind with this particular community we have worked with. And we have compiled all that into a collaborative film, which is called Winds in English. It has been directed by Neko Epiu, our community partner. this idea of performative objects, which are kites. We knew that kids tend to fly kites there because it's a very windy area. You need very few tools and resources to make kites. So we thought that it could be like something that appeals to the community and is something that is easy to make and it involves different kind of people. So that's why we chose kites. So during these sessions, the three of us, and David, Neko, and I think we faced the challenge how to foster this truly collaborative dialogue that incorporated the community, the wind, the land, the non-humans in relation to the project, and through this collective making of kites. So upon arriving to the rancheria, we came equipped with a lot of materials, cord, plastic bags, wooden sticks from a
So I encourage you to watch these films, maybe on your own when you have time. They're available via the project's website, as well as a variety of other resources that we have offered there. But here, I'd like to just, in conclusion, return to the set of questions with which I started. And I'm going to try and get my PowerPoints back up. Let's see. So in the time that we have remaining, I hope that we can discuss, again, how can collaboration, how can campus community partnerships support impacted communities, and what are research methods and outcomes desirable? You've seen a great variety, I think, through the 4 short clips that I showed to you. I'd like to talk with you about how you think campus community research partnerships can break down extractive research paradigms, and also to think about how we can measure the quality and the success of this kind of research. I obviously have some ideas about that, but would also love to talk with you about it. Now, these questions are questions that ultimately invite us to consider, in our age of intersecting socio-ecological entanglements and challenges, what are the learning communities we need for just and sustainable transitions of our energy uses, to be sure, but also to transform in positive and sustainable ways the larger socio-historic ecological structures in which we are all enmeshed. Together, drawing on the wisdom of diverse lived experiences and our collective imaginative resources, I hope we will also ask ourselves and challenge ourselves to come up with answers to my final question: what do we want the University of the Future to do? Thank you. I look forward to our questions.
Great, thank you, Bethany. So let's see. Yes, so folks are starting to populate the Q&A. We have one question from Cooper Christensen. Says, thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. You mentioned that you are committed to the right to research as a human right. How do you conceptualize this right to research, and how do you conceptualize right to research in relation to other human rights?
Oh, thank you, Cooper, for that question. It's so important. The right to research, the way I conceptualize it, is very much indebted to anthropologist Arjun Appaturai's essay of the same title. It's now, I think, about 20 years old. The right to research is a human right. And it's fundamentally interwoven with other human rights, I think, as your question also suggests that it probably is and certainly should be. And my own understanding of Appaturai's work is also generated in dialogue with Indigenous researcher, Maori researcher, activist Linda Tuawi-Smith from Aotearoa, New Zealand, who really talks about how research became a dirty word in Indigenous communities, in which too often academically based researchers, the language is always parachuted in or helicoptered in and then left. And with research results not shared necessarily with the people who generated them, and sometimes even weaponized against them. These are outcomes that, of course, have also been experienced dramatically in African American communities here in the United States, particularly in the field of health policy, I think, but also in questions of environmental justice. So I understand the right to research very much in dialogue with activists from the global South, but also from underrepresented, underserved communities in the global North, where those often very similar colonial or neo-colonial structures abound. I just will add that, I'm of an age, and when I went to graduate school in the 90s and early 2000s, we really believed, meaning my graduate student colleagues and I, and as humanists, we really thought we were good leftists and on the side of liberal and progress and decolonial work, although I don't think we would have called it at that time decolonial, but we certainly thought that we were working for freedom. And increasingly, I think there's been a larger reckoning, certainly people of my generation thinking about what does it mean actually to do academic research, and considering the ways that these spaces have been really sort of academic spaces have been built up by pretty high walls and pretty exclusionary research paradigms that are also based on extractivist kind of method. So I hope that answers your question. Happy to continue talking about it. Jonathan, I'm able to see the Q&A and happy to field the question I see here. Is my research more qualitative than quantitative? Yes, I would certainly say that. I think the biggest finding probably is the necessity to really be open to what are sometimes called devised methods. And that is that it's really not possible to go into a situation of actual partnership with a fully fleshed out set of methods of what you're going to do, because that presumes that you already know what the problem is. And the whole point, I think, of forming new research collaborations is to foster dialogues that would allow for a co-ideation, a co-understanding of what the problem is. And once that problem, I think, is understood jointly, then together appropriate research methods can be devised. So while some partners may have more firm ideas about the variety of methods that might be possible or desirable, I think that having any overly firm commitment to a particular methodological approach before working together with community partners is a real mistake, actually. So one big finding being the necessity of being open to devising collaborative, co-creative models, and then also really documenting and sharing the document, co-sharing the documentation, both of the devising itself, of the process of devising, as well as the outcomes of what comes out of the work together. So you will see throughout the films, for example, that I showed you, there's a very work in progress kind of feel. You see that look in the Intersecting Energy Cultures films that you saw of maps and thumbtacks and this kind of unfinished edges and notes, sticky notes. I'm trying to convey in a visual idiom that collaborative, in progress kind of work. And that also by showing the kind of ways that this work has been made, it wasn't all planned from the beginning. We show how it's made. We're making it as we go. We're documenting the making. The importance of documenting the making, I think, has been a huge finding for me. And one of the reasons why I think that's so important is that it opens up the process to make it replicable to others. And that doesn't mean that they're going to replicate it and find the same findings, not in the way that science does that, replicate and get the same results, but the methods can be replicated and then new results can be found. And those results will necessarily be new because the partnership, the research collective producing them will be different.
Might be some more questions to come in, but I have a couple of questions. One is, what is the structure of the relationship between, I think you have 10 different, I guess, collaborations. I'm wondering like how they,
Themes, we called them. Yep.
or themes, yeah. How do they all kind of interact? Like, is there, you know, the researchers and community groups together? Like, is there, you know, sharing and collaboration across them?
Yeah, exactly. Yes, there was. That was a big part of the enticement, I think, for teams to apply to be part of this working group. That so the working group was active for 2 years and met roughly every 6 weeks, in which 2 teams at a time would present interim findings. So they would talk about what they were doing, challenges that they were facing, how they were solving challenges that they had, questions that they had, help that they wanted. So we had formal presentations that they would give, that each team would give 2 times over the course of the 2-year period. And the rest of the team, together with the project, with the working group's advisory board, offered feedback, advice, etc. So there was a lot of, the whole point of the working group was to get help while devising these methods, like to really know, yes, this is very experimental, like how will we do it? How can we support one another? What's the kind of, in a way, like brain trust of campus and collaborative community partnerships that people could draw on as they were working, because it does feel quite new for many, and to help one another also to answer those 4 questions which I posed to our group here about what constitutes good research. Like, what does that mean? It might not necessarily mean that, you know, it gets it's not objective findings. It's not, you know, it looks very different than traditional academic-based research, and it needs to be evaluated somewhat differently. But I think by providing the collaborative community, teams were really empowered, and I think emboldened actually to try to really try new arts methods. And, you know, we're really, as I said in the more formal part of the talk, we've been really committed to making research outcomes that are really beneficial to both kind of sides of the partnership, to academic partners and to community partners. So the group as a whole has been engaged in these 3 larger sets of outcomes. And the first is a more traditional journal, a special issue of an academic journal, in which each of the teams has written an article. And then we've made 2 sets of outcomes, which are we hope will be especially helpful for community partners. And those are the collection of policy briefs that I talked about, that we helped facilitate this summer. And we've had a lot of interest in this policy brief writing sprint, like helping these teams to write short policy briefs about their work and about what they found, about what energy justice looks like in their local community, and to help them understand who locally they might want to distribute their brief to, but then to gather them all up as a compendium and publish them as a whole, with reflections on how arts-driven methods can democratize energy policy arenas by introducing community voices into them. And then the third set of collaborative outcomes we made, of course, were the films, which you've seen. And we knew anecdotally that members of the various teams really wanted short documentaries as something that they could use. For example, when talking about their work, like I'm talking to you now, for example, they might go and talk to other people, but they might also show them to funders and or possible funders and to say, like, we did this seed project together, you know, with seed funding, and we'd really like expanded funding for our work together. So we're optimistic that these various research outcomes will help us kind of connect the different communities and stakeholders that are stitched into these projects, but also reach them discreetly, whether it's in academic venues or in community fora.
Thank you. I do have one other question as well, and I think it related to particularly what triggered it for me was the example in Ohio and the idea of grief and loss in relationship to energy infrastructure. And I just had kind of a general question around what the role of grief is in this overall question of justice and kind of projecting into the future. Like what is the role of grief in sort of creating our futures?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think it's a really important question, and it's a really hard question too. One of the things that I think, you know, I guess fundamentally partly motivating my own work in this space is a sense of grief, a sense of we're living in a moment of really unparalleled ecological destruction and accelerating climate impacts. And there's no way around that. It's not a good thing. It's not something that to feel happy about. So that's one part of it. I think a lot of these collaborations are really born of grief. But I want to say also that they don't stop in grief. I think that's really essential. That by knitting people together and creating new learning communities, we are together energized to co-create, perhaps amidst ruin, perhaps amidst crisis, but nonetheless to create deeply collaborative and energizing communities who can affect positive transformation in their local and global communities. We humans, especially when we think together in new collaborations and talk to one another, are actually deeply agentic. Like we can do things. And I think sometimes we forget in our old habits, in our old silos, in our traditional silos, we forget that we can change, that we can change structure. These structures that we've inherited, of course, are built up over decades, generations, and sometimes, you know, centuries of history and of choice. And that means that they can also be changed. They are not some kind of physical law that we have to accept, but that working together, deepening our imagination, building agentic capacity, we can change them. And I think that in that sense, grief can lead to real and genuine transformation.
Thank you. That's a beautiful answer. Let's see if we have any more. See any more.
It was really important to me in this talk to also really kind of break down where we might expect grief to be located. Like, I think when we think about energy transition, we think about like, well, shutting down a refinery, like in my first example, is a positive story. In the second story that I showed you, shutting down a coal-fired plant, while perhaps a victory for planetary health and even local air quality, actually for this community, that shutting down was deeply sad and really difficult to deal with. And I think that in the third example that I showed you of the wind park in Colombia, I think that clean energy advocates sometimes quite simplistically think like, well, clean energy, happy, happy, joy, joy, this is all great. But actually has been a deeply sad kind of occurrence for Indigenous communities who have not been consulted in the emplacement of those parks, of those wind parks. So I wanted to complicate a little bit about our understanding of who is experiencing sadness, what constitutes like sad, because that's also tied into our notions of like who are the bad guys and who are the good guys. And my point is here that there are no easy good guy, bad guys. Like we are all implicated in these structures. We are all experiencing various degrees of loss and grief. But coming together actually affords us opportunities to build just transitions and to transform our local and global spaces in really meaningful and positive ways.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we are at 1 o'clock, so we made it. Thank you so much to Dr. Bethany Wiggin for the illuminating presentation and Q&A. And we have the date set for the next of these sessions. They'll be the first Wednesdays of February and April. So I think it's February 6th and April 3rd. So, that's what I have in my head. So be on the lookout for those updates. And thanks to all for being here.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to get to know you, and I'm standing by for any email follow-ups anyone might have. Thanks for the invitation, and thanks to Planet Texas.